How's it going, guys? It's Hugh Sweeney here. Now, if you've just stumbled on this channel, I'm a videographer and photographer based out of Galway City in Ireland. And for the last year, well, almost, I've used the R5C as my main video camera to shoot my corporate commercial work and some of my personal projects too. So with the R5C being a year old now and the fact that they've just released a fairly hefty update on this camera, I decided to make this video to share with you my honest opinion having used this camera and offer some advice on whether you should get this camera or not in 2023. So I picked up this camera last September, having loved the R5 for 2 years previous to that. Now the R5C had some pretty big improvements on the R5, so it was a total no-brainer. I shoot mainly videos, but I also shoot photography as well, so I felt a little bit drawn towards the hybrid style camera as opposed to a more production style video camera, say like the C70. So the R5C just completely fit the bill for me. Now, as soon as I got my hands on this camera, I decided to use it on a commercial job I was doing. I was shooting a video for a hotel, and it was a perfect chance for me to try out the R5C. Now, this was my first time using this cine menu. So coming from the R5's familiar kind of photography style menu, I found the cine menu a little bit daunting at the start. But I learned enough about it to get it kind of to a level where I was comfortable. And I managed to shoot that job to a fairly okay standard that I was happy with. So my plan was, when I was shooting with this R5C over the last year, was to, shoot the main stuff on the R5C, keep it rigged, keep a monitor on it, and then maybe use the R5 for the kind of B-roll stuff, handheld, maybe put it on a gimbal and get a lot of shots with both cameras. But what happened was, I just love the image from the R5C, particularly in the slow motion modes, because the image is just a bit richer and nicer than the R5. So that meant that the R5 has not been used. I've just used the R5C for pretty much everything. I bagged the whole job on just the R5C and it worked out great. The R5C has got much nicer codecs than the R5. Obviously there's the whole RAW side of things, which is pretty amazing. But I found myself not using the RAW at all. I didn't even shoot in 8K, and I was excited about using RAW in 60 frames per second. In fact, I got an external battery straight away to allow me to do that. But I actually haven't gone down that route at all. This camera has literally been fixed on the XF AVC mode, 10-bit. File sizes are big, but they're not that big. They work out great in the edit too, much nicer than the MP4s that you get out of the R5. Far easier to edit. So the workflow with the R5C has been nicer. When you pick up the R5 in your hand, it has to be one of the nicest looking DSLR mirrorless type hybrid video cameras. It really is a class act. The shape of it, the design itself, the amount of buttons and the positioning of them, and it's a beautiful camera. I think it's nicer than a lot of the competition. Oh God. The best way to use a slide pod is vertically. Now, believe it or not, I have only really set up the custom buttons on the R5C just the other evening after updating this new firmware. I did use 1 or 2 custom shortcuts, but now I've got like all 13 buttons set up to just direct me straight to the thing that I want to adjust within the camera. Now, if you are getting this camera, I would strongly recommend doing that. Now, I actually found the autofocus in the R5C to be better than what a lot of users were saying. Now, it has been improved a bit since the new mega firmware update that came out there recently. But one thing I did notice since using this camera is how I started going back to using manual focus again. Now, this is probably because in slow and fast mode, the autofocus will actually stop working from 48 frames per second upwards. So because I like shooting in 72 and 96 frames per second to get that lovely rich slow motion, I had to manually focus, and to be honest with you, that wasn't such a problem. Now it's time to talk about one of the first downsides of this camera, the battery. It's been absolute torture just looking at this battery going down. As soon as you slip in one of the LP6s in there, you're like, okay, how many minutes have I got? It's like watching a bomb about to go off. It's just abysmal, really, the way the battery performs in this camera. And it's a gorgeous looking camera in the hand. It's really beautifully designed, even with the extra depth that's on there to accommodate the fan. So for that reason, I just feel that it's such a shame to have to rig this camera somewhat to accommodate an external battery. This camera would be absolutely amazing if you could just run it with an internal battery for, say, 90 minutes, 2 hours. Now, there is a new power saving mode from the new firmware update, which is great to have. It's better than nothing. But if you shoot like me and toggle between, 24 frames per second and slow mode to get nice slow motion B-roll, well, then you can't use the power save mode. So essentially this camera has always been stuck in sort of a rig for me to get external power, which you tap in via a USB cable. So the micro HDMI cable, I just hate using them. Every time you plug in that cable, even though you secure it with the rig, you're kind of saying to yourself, please work, please don't break this time, please don't break this time. Now there's a difference between rigging a camera like the R5C and a camera like the red Komodo X. If you just look at the way those kind of brain cameras are designed, they're just a thing of beauty when it comes to rigging them. They're designed perfectly for that. Everything from the way the battery just slips in at the back and powers the camera directly without the need of tapping in any cables. The same goes for a lot of the monitors now. Just one cable will power and control the monitor. And there's some lovely componentry that you can rig these sort of brain cameras with as well. But rigging these other cameras where you're tapping in a USB-C cable or dummy battery and a micro HDMI, it's sort of a feeble solution. Now, one thing that I found really frustrating with this camera was the actual inability to directly save down presets. With the Canon R5 and indeed loads of other cameras, you can just save down different settings. Like on the R5, I have C1 is my main piece to camera setting, where it's 24 frames per second, and I've autofocus, face detect, I've certain sound level settings in there. So I know that anytime I want to do a piece to camera, I just quickly set the camera onto C1. So if I want to get 60 frames per second high quality B-roll, I set it on C2, and then I have C3 dedicated to 120 frames per second. So with the R5C, I have no way of saving down my presets as like C1, C2, C3 in the R5 and accessing a different setting really quickly. So some people might say, oh look, it's a cinema camera, it's not supposed to have these features, but at the same time, why not? It's also a photography camera, so why don't they just make it easy and just give you some of these simplified options to make shooting that bit friendlier? The audio preamps in the R5C seem to work pretty well. I didn't compare them to the R5, but I've been fine with using both my Rode Go 2 and my Sennheiser MKE 400 plugged directly into the jack of the camera. Real estate video is kind of challenging. Sometimes you need to get somebody, to be in the shot, be in the frame. What does this feel like? Apparently it's too cold to swim in. So I was told. But if I'm doing a video, I gotta have someone in the shot. There's no point in filming a swimming pool without having somebody in it, like. So here we go. For some reason, I was never really drawn to the Tascam CA XLR device that's designed specifically for the R5C, but recently instead I opted to get myself a Zoom F3.
I'm done! Let me have that last line. I think that went well, actually, that last line.
My first 32-bit floating point recorder, and to be honest with you, that's a great option for me because I don't really shoot that much interview footage where it would be paramount to have that audio straight into camera. It's fine for me just to shoot it separately. Plus, I like the option of having a lav going straight into the camera as well for backup audio. Now, the R5C, unlike the R5 and lots of mirrorless cameras out there, doesn't have inbuilt or in-body image stabilization. In other words, the sensor in the camera is locked in place and will not move to help you stabilize a handheld shot. So in using the R5C over the last year, I noticed that I kind of drifted away from some of the handheld style shooting that I used to do, having had the luxury of dual image stabilization. And that mightn't have been a bad thing because it gave me a chance to sort of take my time and set up some really nice slider shots. Go back to using a gimbal a little bit more and just sort of think about what I'm shooting rather than doing everything handheld, which was a habit that I sort of got into previously. So in a way, filming with a camera that doesn't have inbuilt stabilization made me think of lighting a little bit more and kind of improved my overall product. Sometimes you tire a little bit of that sort of handheld stabilized look. And it's also not to say that you cannot shoot a little bit of handheld stuff, and I still do. I find that the lens does a good job on its own. It's maybe not quite as stable, but with a little bit of post-production stabilization, honestly, it looks great. So there's a workaround to most negatives of this camera. But one thing you kind of can't work around is the slight lack of dynamic range. Now, it does clip out the highlights a little bit quicker than you would like. On a perfectly exposed shot, you could be losing white tones on clothing, for example, and that's not a nice look. So in a way, for me, the dynamic range has been sort of one of the bigger negatives of this camera because there sort of isn't a workaround. And please don't say that you can shoot in RAW and convert it to C-Log 2. That is just not a usable situation when you're doing commercial corporate work where you're shooting lots of content. Maybe you can when you're doing sort of more narrative stuff for yourself, short movies and the likes, but yeah, I feel that this camera, definitely dynamic range is something that I would like to see a little improvement in. So what are my thoughts on the R5C when it comes to photography? Because the R5C is a fully fledged photography camera as well. It's exactly the same as the R5. The only difference is that the R5C doesn't have IBIS, in-body image stabilization. Does that matter when it comes to photography? Well, with stabilized lenses, not really. And to be honest with you, I noticed kind of no difference whatsoever, even with the longer lenses that I used. Now, if I'm going to be perfectly honest with you, I bought this camera to have two photography cameras on the go when I would need it for, say, a photography job. But if I'm going to tell you the honest truth, over the last year, I have never had one instance where I needed two photography cameras on the go at the one time. So did I waste my time on that side of things? Perhaps I did. But I still took a few images with it. I brought it to Portugal with me. I've got the R5C with me on holidays, and I'm glad I brought this camera. I was not going to bring it because I said, you know what, the battery's going to wreck my head, but as it turns out, I really enjoyed it because I was able to just shoot really nice snippets of video. Brought a few batteries, I brought 3, worked out fine. Yeah, it worked out pretty good, and it's exactly the same as an R5. So I would say that if you're, into photography, this camera is a great photography camera as well. Does the battery last as long as an R5's battery in photography mode? I don't think so. It actually should if it's not stabilizing the sensor, because that takes power, doesn't it? Now, when I got this camera originally, I wanted to use it for a lot of wildlife stuff, and the fact that I could shoot in RAW, in 8K, at 60 frames per second and crop in, that was kind of appealing for me as someone who likes wildlife. But if I'm going to be perfectly honest, like with the photography side of things, I kind of didn't really use this camera for wildlife over the last year. And one big reason for that is because when you're shooting wildlife, generally speaking, you're kind of shooting images and then you might shoot a bit of video. And to do both at the same time, of birds, for example, you have to be able to toggle between the two very, very quickly. So with a camera like the R5, you can be set up, shooting your photos, bursting away, and then you can actually just press the record button and get a nice video from custom mode 3, which you would have saved as a certain setting to your liking. But with the R5C, you gotta come out of photography mode, go into video mode, and then, start recording. And with wildlife, you've only got a couple of seconds really to capture stuff. So that means that you're waiting around to switch over. Now, they have improved that as well. With the new firmware, it's much quicker now, but it's still nowhere as efficient as a camera like the R5, where you can literally just be recording within a nanosecond of taking a photograph. And that's the difference between, using your R5C for wildlife, or else just leaving it at home and bringing the R5, which is going to be a much easier camera to use. So I just want to talk about what lenses I used on the R5C over the last year. Well, when I got the R5 a couple of years ago, 3 years ago now, I actually had an opportunity to buy the 28-70 f2 lens cheaper with the camera than the 24-70 f2.8 stabilized lens. So I ended up getting the 24-70 because it was just a more practical lens, even though it cost me more, believe it or not. So 24-70 just gets you everything you need. So it's just been a real go-to lens. Plus the RF 15-35, which is a beautiful lens. I use that too, but nowhere near as much as the 24-70. Now I do have an older 70-200 from Sigma, which I use here and there. I haven't bothered to upgrade that to the RF glass because that RF lens is an expensive lens and I just don't use that lens as much as I said, the 24-70. I want to give a quick mention out to my unofficial sponsor of this video, and that is iFootage. Now over the last while, if you've been watching me here on YouTube, you might have noticed that I've kind of been a little bit hit and miss. I've had personal stuff in my life going on, plus I've been busy as a videographer as well, and sometimes it's kind of hard to get everything right. But iFootage have stuck with me and they've sent me some really cool new products, and without being pushy looking for content as well. Sometimes a company might send you something really cheap for about €100 and they'll kill you if you haven't got the video done in about 2 weeks. But iFootage said, look, here you go, try them out, see how you get on. It would be great to get a review, but look, take your time. And I've been very grateful to them because I absolutely love their lights. I've got a new one here that I'm trying out called the 200DN. It's got a lovely big dome light box with the grid on the front there as well. And I've got another one behind me here called the PL180C, and it's a full color light that I absolutely love. So I have a review of this and another light very similar just up on the channel recently. Do check them out. iFootage are they're making brilliant stuff, very competitively priced. And I just said I'd give them a mention in this video. So shouts out to iFootage. So should you buy an R5C? That is a very, very tricky question to ask. It's a bit of a funny one. I think as of now, this is one of the best cameras on the market. It does have the few negatives that I mentioned, but it's still a really, truly amazing camera. And it has some capabilities that just no other camera can touch, particularly when you consider that this is a fully fledged photography camera and cinema camera. So I think that if you're an R5 owner and you want an improvement and you can get one at an okay price, definitely, I think it's a no-brainer. Once you can work around things like the battery and that, but it's definitely not a good first-time camera. I also don't think that it's an ideal camera to get if photography isn't a thing that you're interested in. It's kind of wasted on you then to have that fully fledged photography side of the camera. So maybe go for another option. Now Canon are bringing out some pretty new cameras. There's rumors that the R5 Mark II is on the way, it's due now. And they do have an R1, which is going to be their like flagship camera. It's probably going to be a very expensive camera, very much geared towards photography as well. Will they make an R5C Mark II? If they do, I think that's highly unlikely. I don't think they will. If they do, they would seriously want to address a few issues. Definitely make it a more robust kind of a camera in terms of battery, connectivity, and dynamic range. Those three things should be addressed. What am I going to do? Am I going to keep shooting with the R5C? With the rig thing going on with the R5C, the fact that it's kind of annoying me a little bit with the connectivity and the battery and all that, I just love the idea of kind of moving to a red Komodo. X, very important. Even though it's a much more expensive camera and it's more expensive to rig out. But I just, as I said, love the camera and its capabilities and its dynamic range, color science, codecs, compressed RAW. There's just so much going for that camera. So what I'm thinking of doing is maybe streamlining some of my equipment, getting rid of some other cameras like my R5, one or two older cameras, plus some older equipment that I'm not using, and maybe put it towards a Komodo X and just have like a Komodo X and the R5C as my two main cameras. So maybe, because last year, to be honest with you, I tried to get myself a red Raptor, and to get a camera like that, I was just saying, you know, that's going to really kind of progress me into the next level of cinematography and videography, and plus wildlife filmmaking, something that I'd love to get into, but that's just too much camera for me right now. It's too costly, but yeah, the Komodo X coming in a little bit more competitively there, almost doable and very desirable. So there's my thoughts on the R5C and my relationship with it. I do hope you enjoyed the video, guys, and that you maybe got something out of it. And you know, if you haven't subscribed already, I would really appreciate it if you would consider that. And a comment, thumbs up and all that, it's always good as well. Love you guys, thanks for watching the video. Until the next one, it's over and out from me. My name is Hugh Sweeney and I'll see ya. Ryan is loading up the bag. Thank you, Ryan. It's a Canon R5 in there. That's it, yeah, yeah, perfect, Ryan, yeah. Yeah, thank you, Ryan, just leave it in now. Yeah, that's it. Good boy. Great, it's great to have somebody to pack the bag for you. And just to organise your stuff, you know, it's brilliant. Thank you, Ryan, yeah. Yeah, it's in now, I think. Yeah, lovely. Thank you so much. Such great help.